Hello everyone, welcome to the AOI streams, in-depth conversations with digital artists and experts to explore how blockchain technology is impacting the future of art. AOI, also known as Art on Internet, is the movement for emerging arts and technology. I'm Federica, and today I'll be your host. In this new masterclass, Cory Haber tells us how he got into generative art from astrophotography, as well as showing us how he mixes colors and 3D prints his own pens for his plotter. Okay, so let's start. I see that we're already live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's very, very exciting. A very exciting class to end this season of masterclasses. We have Cory Haber with us. He's an incredible generative artist. He's based in New York. So thank you so much, Cory, for being with us. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Right, so let's start. First of all, I wanted to know I know that you're based in New York. Have you been grown up in New York? Did you grow up all your life in New York or?
Yeah, born and raised on Long Island, lived in Manhattan for a number of years and now back on Long Island.
Nice, that's awesome. So let's start with an introduction about your journey. Tell us how you started, not just generative art, but when did you start creating art? I know that you've tried different mediums throughout the years.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I necessarily have an art background, but art has always been a part of my life, sort of growing up. Something I always was passionate about and was drawn to. But both art and computers. So I did a lot of computer animation as a kid, and at some point I think I wanted to work for Pixar, and which kind of makes a lot of sense. And I think my freshman year in college, I was an art major for a very, very short period of time before I kind of said to myself, I don't think you can have an actual career as an artist. So I dropped art as a major, but just continued to pursue on my own sort of explorations of paint and photography and different mediums and really just something I did for myself, with really no thought that I would ever be doing it in a more professional manner. So fast forward a bit after graduating college, worked in the technology field, but I was not a software developer. That happened a couple of years after graduating college. I went back to school, became a software developer, and I think as immediately when I graduated from this program, I discovered processing. So this is probably around 2013, 2014 approximately. So I discovered processing and I realized, wow, you can actually make art from code. I had absolutely no idea when I was going back for software development that this was even something that was possible. So just again, on my own, started messing around with processing and then I discovered plotters and, it just sort of took off from there.
That's awesome. That's a great introduction, and you definitely have explored, a lot of different mediums throughout the years. I know that, for example, you are very passionate about photography, especially astrophotography, right? So I think you're going to show us something a little later during the presentation. But another thing that I think is very much, part of your work is a lot of inspiration to nature, right? There's a lot about sunrises, flowers, plants. So where does that come from?
Honestly, I have absolutely no idea. Again, it's just one of those things with photography and painting. Photography was landscape photography. I think I was, heavily influenced by Impressionism. That was sort of growing up my favorite style of art to look at. And I loved just the idea of being able to represent nature in different ways. The passion for astronomy and cosmology came a little bit later, like middle school, high school. I think I had a small telescope and started. I just got really, really involved and interested in these topics. And I think whether it's photographing astronomical objects or something small like a flower, it's all connected. And And I don't know, I think this sort of like grand vision of nature, not just being what we can see around us, but things that are much bigger than us and much smaller than us, really fascinated me. And of course, eventually, made its way into my art. And I don't even feel like I sort of consciously pick these subject matters. It's just, and I think for any artist, it's probably the same way. It's your life experiences, it's things you've done and seen, and that influence how you make art. And so I think it's sort of the same thing here.
And on your daily life, on a daily basis, where do you go and find inspiration?
Well, living in the suburbs, I guess, is a little bit better for nature than living in Manhattan. But yeah, just getting outside as much as possible, traveling as much as possible. A lot of my work was influenced from when I was younger, and I was able to travel a lot more. And I have sort of that trove of photography from my travels that I have, found myself all these years later using in my art and using as inspiration for my art. So, that's pretty much how I find inspiration, going through my old photos and getting out in nature as much as possible.
Right. And one last question before we dive into your work more in detail is, what kind of messages are you trying to convey with your art? What do you think is the ultimate goal for you? Or is it just more a sort of experimentation kind of thing that you do for yourself?
Well,
How do you feel about
yeah, I think that the ultimate goal is to make somebody feel something, and to somehow make a connection, hopefully a strong connection with the image and what a viewer will look at. And the best thing is, not everyone's going to have the same reaction. And that's, of course, since art is subjective, someone can look at it and say, I don't get it, or it's not for me. And the same person can look, or a different person can look at that same image and be moved to tears, right? So it's finding, I sort of look at it as I make art for myself, and if other people enjoy it, then that's great. You can't really make art for someone. You have to make it for yourself. It has to be your passion, your energy that you put into it. And then I think it's about people that connect with your work. You can't please everyone, and you shouldn't try. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I would love to hear more about this and what people have felt about soul as well, because I know there's some interesting stories behind that as well. But I will let you screen share right now and show us what you have prepared for us today.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay, so just let me know if you can see.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So as we sort of started talking about, the themes to my work are things on the grand scale that can be cosmic, all the way down to things that are microscopic. So you mentioned some astrophotography. So this is actually a photo that I took a number of years ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago. I discovered that you can rent very expensive telescopes over the internet. And then you can choose your astronomical target that you want to point it at. And then you can fine tune all of the camera settings to, what kind of photo do you want to take? A single long exposure or hundreds of really short exposures. You can target it over one night or 5 nights. It's really sort of about how much money do you want to spend taking these pictures. So I started having a lot of fun picking different astronomical objects, photographing them, and then there's sort of post-processing software where you can combine all of the exposures together to create a single image. And that's because these objects are typically very faint. And so you stack the photos together to create something more luminous that you can actually see. So this is M51. It's an entire galaxy. It's probably about 400 million stars in that one galaxy. And this is just stuff that really sort of I was drawn to and fascinated me. And eventually, all those years later, influenced work like Soul, where I was very comfortable with astronomical data and thinking about these APIs and how could I pull information in from them. So sort of a background of a little bit of background about Soul and why did I use astronomical data. So again, I have thousands and thousands of photos. This is just one of my favorite pictures. It was in color, and I like the black and white version much better. But again, lots of landscape type photography that I had done. This again is also probably a 12, 15-year-old photo.
Where did you take this?
Let's see. This is actually on my honeymoon. So this is an island called Lake Taha in French Polynesia. Really,
that's beautiful.
Pretty magical place. Yeah, so I have lots of sunrise, sunset type photographs that I've taken over the years. And then, as another thing that you had alluded to, was flowers. Ever since I moved out of the city, I started planting flowers every spring and photographing them. And again, all of this was like pre-NFT, but eventually made its way into a lot of my work. So just another photo and sort of more background about myself. So a lot of my work was really pre-NFTs, before I ever heard of NFTs or spent much time thinking about the blockchain. But when I was getting started with processing, like many people, there's flow fields and circle packing algorithms that I think a lot of people get started with. And the image on the left is a phylotaxis pattern, which you find in sunflowers and you find a lot in nature. I think pineapples could be considered a phylotaxis pattern. This was like a modified phylotaxis pattern. It's not exactly the pattern. I was trying to do something different. But this is a print. You can see in the upper right, it's a print of the piece. And I actually had an Etsy store at one point because I was like, oh, I'll put these up and make prints and sell them for fun. Yeah, I did that for a little bit. But again, I discovered plotters, and maybe in 2017, approximately, finally purchased an AxiDraw. It took me like a year to build up the courage to say, all right, I'm going to spend all this money and buy a plotter. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. But I bought a plotter and started experimenting. I think this is a video. Let's see if this comes through. So really, really small lines, really fine lines using technical pens. I think this plot took about 24 hours straight to run. It's actually really small, and I have the physical right here, which I can show later. So stuff like that, and then.
So I see that you started with the work that you showed us before. It's very colorful, and then you have just the let's say black and white in here. So what is the difference in that sense? What is that inspired you in terms of colors in both of these works?
Well, I think at the time with this piece, I was experimenting just with black India ink, and I wasn't thinking about color in terms of the plotter. With the plotter and color, things can, depending on what you're trying to do, get much more complicated. So you have to color separate all of your files, run one color at a time. And versus if you're doing some sort of generative output, you don't have to think that way. So I think whether you're making something just digital or you're thinking about making something physical, you have to go through different thought processes in your head and also in your code in terms of how are you going to bring this to fruition. So I did, and I think you'll see very soon, start to think about how to do color in the plotter. And so the next piece was kind of interesting. I apologize if you hear, I think my then 2-year-old or 3-year-old might be in the background asking me something. But this, this one, just using like white gel pens to do I think I was trying to do a cloud pattern. And actually, yes, I actually have the next slide is the piece. It was, since the Axidra was somewhat size limited, I always wanted to go bigger and bigger and bigger for some reason. It's just what I wanted to do. So I broke the piece up into several smaller pieces and then combined it, which you can see here. So this was, again, obviously taking a photograph and using an algorithm to make these points. And then the size of the point is based on the grayscale values, like really simple type stuff. But I just wanted to see what could I create with it. And I think this is about, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet or 4 feet by 5 feet. I forget exactly. But it's pretty large. You can see in the lower right all of the pens I went through just to make this one piece. So that was fun. But again, then I started thinking about color, and just I do a lot of research for materials. So paper and pens, and how can you do watercolor or paint, and it's just things I'm just constantly experimenting with. So here again is another photo-based work, but I was trying to do pointillism, but with watercolor. So this is a block of watercolor paper and a watercolor marker. So here's this running.
We have a question from the audience as we're watching this. So Saris is asking, I found the resource of repetition as a technique incredible. My question is the following. Is repetition also used as a concept when creating the work? Because I found it interesting that in the previous photos, it was always present inside some element. Is the question clear?
I'm not sure.
Let's see, Saris, maybe you can expand a little bit as well on that. So let's see if we can try to reply to that.
Yeah. And the repetition, I don't know if it's always like conscious, like a conscious decision that I'm thinking about, or if it just kind of shows up in its own way. And then, so if I fast forward a little, this is the completed or a near completed piece. Here's a video of it. And when it gets really close, it's really cool. You can see the watercolor and how it blends and distributes the color. It's so subtle at this point. The dots, it's almost like if you stop now, you don't know if you'd even tell a difference, but it's adding all of these subtleties. And it's just probably this very small piece. I think it's 11 by 14. I mean, it was probably a few 100,000 individual dots, and took quite some time to complete. But again, this was like a fun experiment to see what I could do with color and the plotter in a way that, sort of made sense. So I had done a lot of experiments like this, but ultimately my goal was to figure out how can I make a painting, whether it was oil paint or acrylic paint. How can I put a paint on canvas using a plotter? Now, if we were to backtrack a little bit, I had spent a lot of time when I was younger actually making paintings. So this was a part of me and a part of something that I had wanted to get back to, but I somehow kept convincing myself I never had time to paint anymore. Painting is something you need hours and hours and a free time, and it just seemed like I could never muster up sort of the energy or the will to make paintings anymore. So I had this overwhelming desire to figure out how to use the plotter to make a painting. So sort of the first step on the left, I sort of taught myself how to 3D model. And from that, I was able to take those 3D models and send it off to a company that would 3D print it and send the models back to me. Of course, the problem was that whole round trip could take about 3 weeks. And then I would receive the 3D printed outputs and realize I made a mistake. And I had just spent, $150, and now I have to do it all again and wait 3 more weeks. So that was kind of a problem. which I solved shortly after this. But here you can see the basic premise was if I could control the sort of the viscosity of the paint, I could have it sort of not drip out of the tube, but sort of through capillary action, it would touch the canvas, pull out some paint, then you can move to the next spot and it wouldn't continue to pour out. And that's basically what happened. It kind of worked. I think the next slide is a video. It's obviously a terrible painting, but this is the first time I ever was able to sort of say I successfully filled a canvas with paint from a plotter. So you can see it just sort of makes dots, and the paint is very pooly and not well defined. And the canvas itself is very small. It was 11 by 14 inches. But it worked. You would fill the tube with paint and it would kind of drip out, and you could somewhat control it. So what happened next was I realized that the AxiDraw was just too small. It was too small for me. It was too small for what I wanted to accomplish. They now make a much bigger AxiDraw, but at the time, the one that I had was the largest one. So I decided to figure out how to build my own. And as you can imagine, it was a complete and total disaster. So this is my first attempt at building a plotter, and I did get it to work. This control board over here is actually from the AxiDraw. So it's the AxiDraw control board, and then there's a bunch of 3D printed parts, and I found a design on the internet, which is basically the AxiDraw design, but I scaled it up incredibly large, and it was very unbalanced, and it worked, but it was quite terrible. So I continued to sort of figure out what I could do next. This is for scale. You can see the AxiDraw here, and how big the custom plotter that I built was, but it didn't work. So then I found a company called Open Builds that makes like CNC machines, and I realized I could use that to build a plotter by just not putting a router in the machine, but converting it to a pen plotter. So I bought all the parts from them. This is what it looked like completed. It's about 40 by 40 inches square, and it could plot 30 by 30 inches square, which was significantly larger than the AxiDraw. And obviously the design, it's very stable as it gets bigger. And then this is how you would build it. And then I 3D printed parts to turn it into a plotter. So I'm going to skip a bit ahead on the next image. This is my current setup, but now you can see the smaller big plotter is down below, and the super enormous plotter, which is the new one, is on top, and that one can do 50 by 50 inches square. But I needed a better paintbrush, so I bought myself a 3D printer and would continuously iterate to create better and better paintbrushes, so I could control the flow of the paint better. So that's what that video is there, printing sticks at a time. And so then once I was able to 3D print a better paintbrush, I had more success controlling the paint and making paintings on canvas. So this was maybe the first successful attempt at a large scale painting. This is using the 30 by 30 inch plotter, but this canvas is 30 by 40. I would actually separate the files into a left and a right for each color and manually pull the canvas and put it back into position. So, if there were 15 colors, there were 30 files that would have to get run one color at a time. And this was sort of the result. And again, it was based on photography. So
I just have a lot of reactions in the audience. Everyone is like, "This is incredible. This is crazy." Beautiful reactions from us just watching this. Like, what do you mean you created you printed your 3D brush? What's going on? That's crazy.
Yeah. So I've sort of always had a problem-solving mindset, And
Mm.
it just feels very natural to me to think about these things in this way. But yeah, so that I was the only logical conclusion to me was how would you continuously flow paint over many hours without using a pump? So you could buy paint in a pump marker form, but the idea, how would you pump it? Every 10 minutes. You could do it, right? You could.
What we see here again, is it a sunrise or a sunset? I see the colors are very like there's warmth in the sky, but then I also see a lot of blue and red at the bottom. What was the inspiration of this one?
Yeah, so I had used a photograph I took from Laguna Beach in California. It was a magnificent sunset, and these are actually like people who are standing in a small pool of water, reflecting the light of the sunset. And it was kind of just to see, like, is this going to be possible? I think I had spent like 2 years saying everything is an experiment. Because again, there was even at this point I didn't know about NFTs, and there was I made this painting and more after it without ever thinking I would sell it, and I didn't sell it. I still have it. It's actually right behind me. You can't see it, but it's a canvas behind me. Yeah, so I was just making these for myself. This was just fun, and fun experiments. But then I started reading artgnome.com, and I was like, what is I had to, and he would talk about NFTs, and I would Google what does NFT stand for? And I could not find an answer. I'll never forget it, because in the ArtGnome articles, it only said NFT. It never said non-fungible token. So I didn't know what an NFT even was. I had no concept. And I actually, even though I was doing all of this stuff, I was very late to the game, so to speak, to getting involved and to being more active in the community. So NFTs come along, and I eventually sort of get my act together, and I'm like, okay, I've been doing this, my whole life in a sense. I've always wanted to be an artist, a full-time professional type artist. If I could, that would be my full-time career. And so I started, focusing more to create like coherent work, I guess. So I put a bunch of NFTs up on Foundation. The first 3, I think, sold, and it took about like 10 to 20 days, I think. I was completely unknown. I had no Twitter followers. I had nothing. I was on Twitter posting this stuff in 2018, 17, but had very few connections, I guess you would say, in space. So
would you have some?
Oh, I was going to hide the digital physical and ask you to tell me which one was the digital, which one was the physical.
Right.
So I messed that up. So now you know. But so this was one of, I think this piece was sort of a pivotal moment for me. It was I guess at the time a more expensive piece, because I had said I would sell this with the physical framed, and I would ship it anywhere in the world. And yeah, that costs a lot of money, which I didn't realize how expensive it would be to ship a framed piece. And this was large. This was 22 by 30 paper that was then framed, behind glass. So it was very large and somewhat heavy. But anyway, so I started doing more flower type pieces, and it actually led to my first commission, where someone said, so this was called Spring Day number 1. There was a Spring Day number 2 and a Spring Day number 3. And then I had some more work after that. But then I started I received a commission request. And the request was, can you do something like, the Spring Day, the three Spring Days that you did? So I ended up creating a collection on Foundation called Spring Days. And it led to a whole series of work, which really occupied most of my time last year. And that's what these paintings are. So every one of these are all the digital images, but each one of these is a one-of-one painting on canvas. So you can find all of that on my Twitter. for anyone interested, I have a ton of process videos of each of these paintings actually being made at various stages. And so that really occupied most of my time. And then Foundation sort of reached out to me and said, hey, we love what you're doing. We have a new feature coming out called Drops. Instead of doing a one-of-one, you could do, a whole collection at one time. And so I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do, at the time I thought I would do 100 curated outputs. And that would be that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do more long form generative, which I hadn't really done a lot of yet. So I really wanted to push myself to do something new that didn't include any photographic assets in the code. So I decided to do something more long form, entirely just code based, and so that's how Soul sort of came about. And I was doing the work, and I liked what I was seeing, but it still felt like it was missing something. And that's where the idea of, well, if these are generative sunrises, I'm pretty sure I could calculate like where the sun's going to be tomorrow. And at what time is the sun going to be at 5 degrees above the horizon? And so I did some research and I said, oh yeah, you actually can, calculate all of this. And then it just sort of spiraled from there into 365 pieces, one for every day of the year, 2023 for a unique city somewhere in the world that would get pulled from a list, and all the calculations would happen on the fly. And then the information would get written at the bottom of the piece. So it sort of came together over time this way. But bringing it back to plotters, originally I had wanted each piece to be plottable that the owner of the NFT could redeem at like a later point. And so it set me down a path of trying to figure out how to make smaller and smaller strokes with paint on canvas. I couldn't get it to really work well for Soul. So I decided not to do, go to the next slide. I decided not to do plotter, but rather to do one-of-one prints. Since I was going to do one-of-one plotter paintings, I did one-of-one prints instead, and teamed up with Tender.art to do the printing. But yeah, technically Soul is plottable, and it sort of has guided my work this year, which I haven't released anything yet, but I will be soon. But I've been working pretty hard on a bunch of things, and yeah, so it was a good sort of process for what's going to come next.
I just want to remind everyone in the audience, feel free to send any questions that you might have about this. Soul is an incredible collection, really. It's really incredible. I don't know if you want to show us anything more about Soul. I did have maybe like a question or two about it, but you can also keep screen sharing. There's no problem. Like you can keep the Soul behind or any part of the presentation. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, why did you decide to leave the information underneath each piece of Soul?
Sorry, why did I choose to leave it there?
Yeah. What is the meaning of that part?
So I guess in my previous pre-NFT physical work, and even some I did some printmaking. When I was in New York City, I took a class in printmaking, and it felt very natural to write, the title, the date, or something, and sign the bottom of the work. And I liked the border instead of borderless for Soul, and it just felt natural for me to want to put something down there. And so when I went down this road of calculating the API information for where the sun will be on a given date at a given time in a given latitude and longitude, why hide that in just the metadata? So it's amazing that it's in metadata, and you can sort of sort and filter and find pieces based on these bits of information. But it I think it adds so much to the piece to written at the bottom, so it puts it into context what you're looking at. You actually know, this is Stockholm, Sweden. This is where the sun will be on 9/22 this year. At barely 0.3 degrees above the horizon. I just think it adds without having to go to the blockchain or to look up the metadata to see what this is. You can just read it. And I think it was unique. I don't think a lot of people were doing that. And that also was something I liked. Just do it differently. And maybe a couple of people I showed it to before I launched said, "Oh, I don't know if I would want, anything written digitally on the bottom. Like, I don't know how that makes me feel." And there was a lot of, I had a lot of internal back and thought, like, should I do this? Should I not do it? And I was like, you know what? At that point, like, what do I have to lose? And I'm so glad that I chose to do it. And I think you have to sort of take some risks sometimes, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you'll never know unless you take that risk. So now I really feel empowered to just try to do things my way and different, and not try to succumb to anyone else's expectations.
And another question I have about the places that you chose for each output. How did you choose those? Are they related to any of your travels or any other reasons?
So I needed 365 unique cities, and it's actually a difficult problem if you want the cities to be somewhat known. There's actually only so many cities around the world. If you do capital cities, there's not 365, I don't believe. So you'd have to then go deeper into each country and get city names that people might recognize. There's obviously tens of thousands of city names, but if you want recognizable names, so I curated a list. So it wasn't really necessarily based on my travels. It was, I needed a list of unique names, but the list was larger than 365 so that it could be somewhat random, and I didn't have 100% influence over the cities. So that's how the names of the cities came about.
All right, that's awesome. I see no other questions in the audience so far. I see a lot of great reactions though, so I'm very happy to see everyone's reaction here. So yeah, let's continue. Let's move on.
Awesome. So the next thing I have is I was going to turn off screen sharing, and I have some physical plots that I've made. So the first one I'm going to show actually is totally maybe different and unexpected. So I used the plotter as a cutting machine. So instead of the plotter putting down ink or paint, it actually cut holes in these sheets of plastic. And the idea was to make a pointillism painting. And so I would put this over the canvas and then put paint on top of the plastic and squeegee the paint across the surface, forcing it through the holes. So I have, let's see, I didn't count, but I have this was for one painting. All of this here, you can see the white sheets actually work a bit better. You can see. So using the plotter in a different way to cut and then manually push paint through. I even tried spray paint as a technique to spray paint through the holes.
What did you use to cut through the plotter? What kind of
So I did two different techniques. One is I could use the same plotter that's behind me, and instead of putting a pen or a paintbrush in it, you put a cutting tool. So there are these cutting tools that have these incredibly sharp, incredibly small blades that can pivot. And so as it drags, the blade can actually rotate with the force of the plotter, and make very precise cuts. And that's good for larger shapes. For these really, really tiny shapes, I actually have, I don't know what you would call it. It's a cutting machine. It's like a machine, but it looks like a desktop printer. And you feed one sheet into it, and it just has this blade that will have a lot of pressure. So that plotter has no pressure. It's just gravity. The other plotter I have, again, I forget what it's called, but I haven't used it in a long time, can actually apply force and cut through material. But it is a plotter, right? It's X and Y, and it's and a Z pen lift of some kind. So anyway, that's again, thinking differently about how can you use a machine. And the reason I did that was also to make multiples. So with a plotter, it takes so long to make one piece. How could I repeat the process? So with having these sheets, I could actually do, and I did. I used that to make 3 identical pieces, and of course they came out very differently because you're squeegeeing paint manually. So that was kind of cool.
We have a comment from Kareem. He's saying like, this would show up quite nicely displayed on glass barriers at homes or offices. Have you tried to put them in frames or anything?
The finished piece?
Yeah.
I haven't. I have a ton of it sitting right here and more in the closet, and it's just sitting in the closet in stacks. Even that piece, I gave one away. Of the 3, I gave one away to my friend. I think the other 2 are in there. I guess I could pull it out if I have time at the end. But yeah, I probably should frame it. So this is just an early piece with using really small pens and just trying to do different things. This is just a triangle subdivision. It's really just 2 triangles that then get subdivided into 2 more and subdivided into 2 more over and over and over again. I think I read something that Tyler Hobbs had done, or maybe he posted about this, and I was like, oh, I'm going to try that. And this was like 2018 or something like that. Here's another one where just like the pen actually ran out, and I kind of liked the way it looked. Here's the one that I showed in the video, which I really liked, this one. And you can see just how incredibly small the lines are. I think it's a 0.2 millimeter rote ring isograph is the technical pen that I used. And then again, with nature and playing around with different ideas for like pixelated forms. And then I had this obsession for a little while with like isometric projection and isometric cube stacking, which you still find in a lot of generative art. I've seen it on art blocks. I've seen it in a lot of places. And I was trying to figure out like, how can you shade the cubes in? And so these are just lines with like an exponentially growing distance until it hits, past the edge. So you can see the texture, that you can get in those corners was kind of cool. And then of course everyone loves Sol I discovered Sol and I was like, okay, that's amazing. So just like playing around with different line, very simple, like offsetting lines to create moire patterns. I had done that for a while. I think I have a time lapse of this that you discovered. And this is the physical plot again, just another trying to do color. Very simple stuff. And then this might be recognizable to some people. There's a piece, 2 pieces on Foundation that this one is based off of. So again, this one I never did anything with, but I kind of liked how it looked. And then, going further back, I did a lot of flow fields, but I was trying to do like a 2-tone flow field with India ink. So this is blue and black India ink. Actually, it might be black India ink and blue watercolor with a thicker technical pen. So it creates really good like three-dimensional depth that I kind of liked. And these didn't use Perlinoise. I know Perlinoise comes inside of processing. I was using simplex noise, which is a different type of noise algorithm that produces some really nice stuff. And then it's funny, when I was going through some of the work for this masterclass, I totally forgot about this. This is something I was really interested in doing, like generative clouds. I don't know. I can't remember if this one is generative or not, but you know, the pens actually kept running out, or they weren't even running out. From pen to pen, it would put different amounts of white on the paper, so it kind of became glitchy, which I thought was kind of cool. Let's see if that comes out. So I really like this idea of using printmaking paper. This is black printmaking paper, and doing different things with this. I might come back to something like this at some point. And then, you know, I still have, I think, 1 or 2 physical plots from Pixography, which was a series I did on Foundation. So these are unclaimed physicals. So you can kind of see some of the influence of the earlier work coming out in here. And this was much harder to execute the physical plot, because you have black India ink and red India ink, so a 2-tone India ink background, and then acrylic paint using small nibs to create the pixel trees on top. Yeah, so a mixture of ink and paint on paper. So that's what I have to show.
That's awesome. That's incredible. And thank you so much for sharing everything. I actually have a question. How do you store all the works you just showed us? It's just out of curiosity. I'm curious if because you brought a lot of them from the side.
A lot of the bigger ones are just usually in what's it called? I put like glassine paper on top to protect it, and then slide that into those big plastic sleeves, and then just stack them.
Awesome. We do have, well, a lot of incredible comments. Malo is saying that the print of the daisy looks incredible, and he's asking if there's any upcoming project flower themed.
Yes.
Getting an exclusive here. Okay, great.
So I haven't done new flowers in a while, and I'm working on something now, and maybe in about 1 month, from just a couple weeks.
That's incredible. Is there anything that you can show us right now, very quickly at all? Any little sneak peek?
I don't think I have anything new that I can show right now. I have one other thing new coming next week. It's just one piece, part of a group. I guess you would call it a group show. I probably can't say what it is. I don't think it's been announced yet, but I'm contributing a work to a group show. I'm pretty excited about it. I think it looks really good. Not a flower though, but something maybe that looks more cosmic.
Nice.
That I'm excited about, because I don't think I've done any NFTs in that genre yet, or that kind of a feel to it. But you'll see like it has like a connection to soul in maybe its look. But yeah, so I think next week, Tuesday.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's great. I see Malo is very happy about this news. Karim as well, getting a lot of great comments here. So you're talking about a group exhibition coming along, and the idea, the question that I would love to ask is, what do you see for the future of generative art this upcoming year, in 5 years, in 10 years? What do you predict?
I dare not predict. No, I think that there's going to be, lots of ups and downs, lots of prognostications of doom and gloom, and then rebirth. And I think at the end of the day, I try not to think about too much where it's going, because I'm just going to make art, and if it connects with people, great. And if it's on the blockchain, because the blockchain is still around in 5 years, which of course it will be, then it'll be there. And if it's not, then it'll be somewhere else. I mean, you can't. I think Pandora's box has been opened. You have a global community of people, of creatives, of brilliant creative people making art in the past who had no avenue to show and to exhibit, and no community around the art. And I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think it's going to change, and in ways completely unknown. But it'll never. At this point, it'll never go away. It's only going to grow.
Absolutely. Awesome. So another question that I was thinking about before, when you were talking about how you started in the NFT space, and maybe it took you a couple of weeks before you sold the first piece. And in our audience, there's a lot of emerging artists, emerging generative artists. So would you like to give them any advice, both in the generative art scene, but also generally as an artist? What kind of advice would you give to our emerging artists in the community?
I guess just, it's going to sound so corny, but like, just be true to yourself and your art, and it'll find the right audience. Don't try to follow trends. Don't look at what other artists are doing and say, I'm going to do that because it's working. It'll never work for you, right? There's no formula. There's no. The advice is, don't listen to anyone. Just be passionate about what you do, and I think success can follow. Whatever success means, to you. All right, so let me, I'm gonna pause my video. Okay, you can see that?
Yes, we see you perfectly. Oh my God, this is so exciting.
Okay, so, okay. I set up this little like bridge thing so I can put the camera above. Okay, so this is basically how I make paint and use it. So here is, forgot to show this earlier. This is a 3D printed paintbrush, and there's like a nib that basically I just hot glue a rim around it so that paint doesn't leak out of it, and that's right up here. So this is the newer version. I have, actually, here you can see, I have like a whole, these are all different versions of the 3D printed paintbrush. So what I'm going to do is I'm just quickly mix a couple of colors together. And so this is a golden fluid acrylic. I find that the high flow acrylic is a little too watery, and so that's probably fine. Okay, so let's just mix this up. And this is the process that I go through for mixing each color that I end up painting with. Okay, so as you can see, it's pretty sticky, not flowy at all. So what I do is I usually take this airbrush medium. So they make a high flow medium, but for some reason I find that the airbrush medium works really well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to thin the paint, and I'm going to try and get it into a specific consistency, which is just something I have felt, something I can just feel, like when is it the right consistency. to flow through and to still be somewhat opaque and not too transparent of a color. So I kind of switch it around, see how it drips. I'm not going to get this quite right. I'm probably going to make it a little too thin, but that's okay. Better that it comes out than it doesn't. Okay, it's probably good. Yeah, I think that's okay. So what I do next is I just use a like a syringe. You can buy these very inexpensive. They're used to refill printer inks, like for your desktop inkjet printer. So you can buy these blunt syringes. Let's let me see. I'll put this in here. Okay, so I'm gonna fill this up. Hopefully you can see this. Okay, so now we're kind of ready to go, and I'm gonna fill it into this. But as soon as it gets filled, it's gonna start coming out. So what I'm gonna do next, well, that's okay. Let's fill this up. Okay. All right. So it's going to start coming out. And what I'm going to do now is turn the plotter on. I'm actually going to leave this right here for the moment. And now I'm going to switch cameras one more time and get the plotter going. That's okay. All right, so let's move over here. Okay, I have this little GoPro stand that I'm going to try to make work. You know what? Maybe I'll just hold it. Okay, so give me 1 second. I'm going to turn the plotter on. And yes, here's the filled paintbrush. I'm going to put it in the plotter. And then I'm just going to hit go. I'll show you the computer. Okay, so let me take this. All right, so there's it filled. Now I'm just going to come over here and have it run. And I haven't tested this file, so hopefully it works. So this nib is it's pretty small. It's like a 0.7 millimeter. So you're able to get these really fine lines with paint, which I always found really difficult. So this is sort of the new process I've been working on this year. So I can stop it here if it's basically going to continue on for about 20 minutes. I think this file, making this sort of rings of these circular rings around each other. You can also get a sense for like the scale of the machine. Let me just pause this for a second. Come back. Okay.
That was so incredible. I didn't want to speak because I didn't want anyone to be disturbed by my voice, but that was so awesome. I feel like I read in the comments right now. We have Lonwick is saying, very satisfying. You should create a YouTube channel of just. And funnily enough, we were talking about this today, but I did find some of your videos back in the like plotting and showing these videos. So there are some of them. Lonwick, if you're interested, look for Cory on YouTube. But definitely you should post.
Very old.
Love them. We love them.
I know. I have a lot of videos. I posted to Instagram. I posted to Twitter. I haven't done much on YouTube. I have some very old. Well, they're 2 years old. They feel like they're 10 years old when I look at them. But yeah, they're 2-year-old videos of the axi draw and some of the earlier experiments that I was doing. Yeah.
And in the others, they're also saying it's like watching a chef preparing the secret sauce.
Yeah, you know, a lot of generative artists, or I should say some, have reached out to me, plotter artists, asking like what are your materials? How are you doing this? And I love talking about it and sharing. I actually, for not for paint, but for ink with the technical pen. This is I 3D printed this because the what would you call it? The cartridge or the inkwell that comes with these technical pens is so small. So here's actually an example I can show. So this is what it comes with, right? And so it was just too small for me. So I 3D printed this much larger one, and I really want to start posting these 3D printed, these basically 3D models, right? So if I post it, then anyone could download it and 3D print it and use it with the Rotring isograph technical pen. And I'd love to see more people sort of doing this kind of stuff. So I think it helps all plotter artists to have more people come into the space, more creativity. So yeah, I started a couple of people like privately. I started sending these to, but you know, I see no reason not to post it publicly.
I have a question. It's more like a technical question about Plotter that I probably don't know too much about. So, have you ever tried, or is it even possible to have like a pen, like the one that you designed, that you printed 3D, and then at the end having a sort of brush, like a paintbrush, so creating this sort of brush strokes, or is that impossible because the ink is just not gonna work well? How is that? Does that work?
I actually have. I took I think one of my kids' really cheap paintbrushes, and I broke the stem off of it, and then there's still some plastic filled in there, but I'm pretty sure you're right. And if you just drill out that plastic, so drill a small hole through it and then flow paint through it, I'm pretty sure you can get brushstrokes, like actual brushstrokes from bristles from a paintbrush that you can buy in a store. And that's kind of exciting to think about. And then it leads, see, what I love about this is it leads you to think, okay, well, if I'm going to do digital physical, but that how would I replicate those strokes digitally so that when I make the physical, there's some parity. It's not just, you know, a solid line in the digital or the physical. So this is where the digital can influence the physical, And the physical has a feedback loop, which can influence how you write the code to make the digital. And this is what I find so fascinating. So if I do something that has a plotter component, I have to always say, how can I make it? How can I turn what the digital is into a physical? And so if I want to do brush strokes, which I haven't really done, it's always these lines. If I want to do brush strokes, great. But now I have to figure out, I can do that in code. That's fine. But how would I do that in a plotter? So it's like fun. I don't know. It's like really good problem solving, and yeah, it's a great idea.
I hope I gave some inspiration of something I didn't know. I was like, I hope it's not a completely crazy question to ask. But yeah, no, I was thinking about it because there's a lot of painters in our community and in our audience right now. So I was wondering if this would be something for them to be inspired by with their usual painting process, so that could be something fun to try out. But yeah, it
Or
sounds
like
everything
an
sounds
interesting, like an interesting collaboration too. Maybe like someone who just paints and a digital artist who creates the digital, and then the painter has to recreate it.
Absolutely. All the painters who are here in the audience right now, sorry, reach out to Cory, do that. Because it could be something could come out of this. It will be very, very exciting. I know there's a lot of people, especially in the Web3 scene, who are very keen to experiment, to try new things, and really go out of their boundaries, right? So yeah, it would definitely be super, super exciting. So I'm also very excited to see what you're going to come up with in the next few weeks, months with your group exhibition, but also with the new collection or artworks that you can tell us anything about right now. But very excited to know, very excited to see it very soon. Anything else you would like to share with our audience today?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's fun to just sort of give people more behind the scenes. There's so much that goes in to plotters in general, no matter if it's just ink or paint or whatever it might be. It's like a whole nother world of this space, I think, that hasn't gotten as much attention. But I'm excited, to keep pushing and expose more people to it.
Absolutely. And honestly, what you just showed us today, and I'm sure everyone else can agree with me, is it could be a whole series of masterclasses on its own. It could be a whole thing by itself, because you showed us right now something that is incredibly valuable, and there's so many other things that I'm sure we could explore. So definitely keep that in mind, and maybe think about exploring something a little bit bigger and more focused on your practice. I see some people commenting, Karim is saying, appreciate you being open around your process. That's so true. It's something that, not many artists feel comfortable doing. And, creating, I think, and I would love to know how you feel about it, but I feel like creating is a very intimate process as well, and very private sometimes. And it makes us very vulnerable to show it to others, So one thing is showing the output, one thing is showing the result of an artwork, one thing is showing how you made it, because I think it really makes you vulnerable about what you went through and your practice and even the mistakes that you might come across, right? So how do you feel about this, sharing this process with us, and generally sharing about how you create work, how you conceptualize your works as well?
Yeah, I think I've struggled with sharing and talking about some of it, but I think at the end of the day, the more people that, it's like, if you invented the paintbrush, would you keep it to yourself? These are just tools. By themselves, they do nothing. So the more you share, the more you grow the community, the more people you bring to the space, the more artists do this type of work, which then grows, grows the space and brings more awareness. So I think, not sharing is far worse for any individual artist, doing something like this than sharing would be. So, I'm trying to be more and more open. Like I said, I want to post my paintbrushes and these extension, ink extensions, so that more people can run plotters for longer, experiment with more materials, and I think it'll just help everyone.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I can't wait to see what you're going to share about the models of all the 3D printing as well. If that's going to grow in the generative art scene among the other artists as well. I'm sure everyone will be so interested to try that out too. So we really obviously really appreciate that, sharing your practice, sharing your as I think Kareem was saying before, the recipe behind the sauce.
Well, I also think I've seen an increase, I think this year already, in very high profile artists who are trying to mimic paint with code, and then printing it and displaying it. And so how amazing would it be if these artists also could, whether it was themselves or through some other party, turn these into physical paintings? I think that's going to be a theme that's going to grow.
You would say that's going to be the next, let's say, phase of the generative art scene. Do you think it's because people, we are always online, we are in the digital world nowadays, especially in the blockchain area, but do you think is it because people are still, regardless, they're still very much attached to the physical human part of art? Do people still have this need to be able to touch the piece of art?
I think the answer is yes. As much as digital art has grown, I think you're now seeing more and more digital artists print their work and offer signed prints of their work, and people displaying the work in their homes. It's not a negative for digital art. It's not like a step backwards. I think it's a huge step forwards, to sort of admit, like, we can't live in the digital world 24 hours a day. So to bring that digital into the physical world makes a lot of sense. And I don't think there's a lot of resistance anymore. Maybe a year and a half ago, people were not interested in the physical. And I think now you're seeing a significant interest in the physical.
Yeah, totally. I guess it's also because, slowly we are merging these two worlds of the traditional art scene and the blockchain art scene. I think inevitably there is going to be some points of contact, like in this case, the digital world being made more physical as well. So I think these two worlds merging are also kind of bringing this, also like the catalyst of this sort of movements, if we call it like that, So totally good. I see a comment from Malo, who's from our community. Hi, Malo. He's saying, thank you so much for sharing. I look forward to your next job. He said, I love physical art. I just don't have enough walls. And I think digital displays will really be a game changer for NFTs.
Oh, I completely agree. And then, of course, you'll have more and more development of digital screens to display digital art. So you can have, limited wall space, or your walls are already filled, but you could have, sort of changing displays. And I think we're absolutely going to see more of that. But that's still a way of sort of bringing the digital into the physical, to display it, because people still want to put it on their wall and display it. Right now, the screen technology is just way too expensive for displaying NFTs, and way too limited to have sort of the kind of impact I think we all want it to have. But we'll get there. And that's where, when you asked me earlier about predicting the space, and this is what I think it's impossible to predict. We don't know if it's going to be 1 year or 5 years before screens for digital art become so ubiquitous that, they're just found in everyone's home, which probably will happen one day. Or a vast majority of homes of people who like art, where it's just another commodity like a TV.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. I want to thank everyone who's also sending all these beautiful messages, comments, questions. I'm very happy to see you guys interacting. And I'm happy that you really enjoyed the session because it was really beautiful. I think we're now at the end of the session. So Cory, I really want to thank you again. It's been amazing. It's been such an honor to see your behind the scenes, your process. And I think there's something there that we can do to perhaps make it expand this and make it like a whole series on its own. We can definitely talk about this.
Yeah, I would love that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So thank you so much again. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you, Joe, for sharing. Thank you, everyone in the audience.
Thank you. Thank you. This is great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the AOI streams. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and subscribe to listen to more stories from the pioneers of the ecosystem.